Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Magnetism podcast, where the creator economy, where brand building and the psychology of influence intersect. Okay, I'm your host, Tuan. I'm the founder of Glow Ups Media, and this is going to be the space and the ecosystem where we explore these topics of what really makes people, ideas, and brands magnetic. Okay, so we're not going to be just talking about the tactics and the strategy, but the inner charge, the inner change, the inner charge, and the outer expression of influence. Right, so each episode, whether it's going to be solo deep dives and chats and rambles from myself, right, we also be diving into the stories, the psychology, and the culture to cover a lot of the unseen, hidden, invisible forces that draw and that drive people, the power, and the opportunities into your life. Okay, so let's dive into it. This is going to be episode 3 today, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about how what you don't use, you lose. And I'm going to talk about this firstly from a example from physical fitness, because that will be the easiest example and also the most relevant one based on the weekend, which I'll get to into a second. But how it's a universal principle that applies across the board, right? From your confidence, from your mindset. I'm talking about the internal, personal aspects of yourself first, but also in your branding and your business and so forth, right? As well as the discernment and how that ripples firstly from you and then outwards into the world. Okay, so the topic of this came along, and the reason I wanted to riff on this and a couple of other topics is because on the weekend, on the Saturday morning, I went down for a training run with a good friend. We ran for 26 kilometers, just training up for the City to Bay half marathon in a couple of weeks from now. And he's also training up for the Melbourne Marathon in about 6 weeks. So we just started to get the kilometers in and start training, right? And let me tell you, it was not as, it was harder than, that distance was harder than what I remembered it to be, right? And it exposed the gap between what you don't consciously do, in this case, proactively train or maintain a certain baseline of standard in your life, right? A baseline of resistance, a baseline of capacity, right? You will feel that gap once you've been in that situation, right? We started on Henley Beach, right? We ran down Glenelg, ran down to Brighton, and we looped our way back to Henley Beach, right? And so I've ran half marathons before, and I ran my first marathon last year on the Great Ocean Road, but this felt difficult, right? Which brings back to the principle of maintaining a certain baseline, right? So then when you're being put back into the situation, it's not a shocker, right? My legs are definitely still feeling it from the weekend. Recovery is okay. That was the it brought the topic of today's conversation. Okay. How I thought I want to start with this riff on this episode is I'm going to be experimenting with a format where I've written down a few key question prompts, right, to trigger my mind to answer it in a way, right, where I can riff off of it with you guys. So I know everyone has a different way of doing things. Some people like to have structure or a script and they write things down. Some people put cue cards, whatever that looks like. I personally, do you ever, maybe you relate to this, maybe not, maybe you do, but do you ever have one of those times, it happens a lot, where maybe a lesson or an insight or a problem or something that or an idea comes to you and you write it down, you journal about it, you reflect on it, you maybe put it in your Notion document or whatever, and then it never comes up again, or it just comes up in the most random times, and sometimes you wish, damn, I wish I had said that, or I wish I expressed that. It's just a format to see if I can express that and maybe trigger the primacy effect where these thoughts and these insights that might be percolating my subconscious mind can come out, right? So let's see how we go with this, right? So the way I do this is I kind of scaffold, a general idea of things which I've written down recently that's been on my mind, and a few prompts to see if we can bring them out, right? So here goes. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the mind, and I talk a little bit about the body, and I talk a little bit about training, but this also applies to confidence and your social muscles, your presence muscles, you expressing your thoughts and you expressing your ideas, because when you, in life, there's no such thing as staying put, right, or staying in neutrality, right? You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards, right? And there's no in-between state there. So when you stop expressing your ideas, when you stop expressing yourself and putting yourself out there into the world, whether that's yourself, your thoughts, your ideas, right, you atrophy. Okay, that's just fundamental and that's just universal human law there. Okay, so When it comes to confidence and when it comes to presence and it comes to socializing, I like to think of 2020, right? That was a very big, was a very big reset in a lot of ways for a lot of people, myself, for a lot of people, a lot of friends in my life, a lot of people in the world, um, where without consciously and now intentionally like exercising your confidence and your social muscles and to connect with community and with people and to get out there, right, it will weaken. Okay, and this is why we've been seeing a lot of, there's no surprise, all across Australia we've been seeing an explosion of run clubs. We're seeing an explosion of wellness clubs, right, where you go and you do your breath work and your cold plunges, etc., right? It's because what 2020 2021 created was this loneliness pandemic, right? Which is why it becomes so important to consciously exercise these muscles, right? Exercise these muscles, firstly, on an individual level, and then also on a collective level, right? So we raise that collective consciousness as such. Okay. So with your confidence and with your presence, this is not just something that's just given to you, right? Um, you're not just born with the confidence, and you're just not born with the charisma, and you're not born with the presence. It's something that you've intentionally, some people, you start just based on your unique wiring, personality, upbringing, how you've been socialized, how you socialize, have different baselines and capacities, right? Starting points from others. But the universal is the same for every single individual, right? Which is that it needs to be intentionally cultivated and intentionally elevated and progressed and improved upon if you want to see, progressively, market improvement in your outcomes, right? Your outcomes in your connection to self and your connection to the world and your connection to other people, as well as expand what it's called the surface area of luck, so to speak, right? Of the kind of people, the quality of people, the quality of clients, the quality of relationships, the quality of partners that you bring into your life. Okay, so confidence and presence is one of those things. So let me see, how quickly does confidence fade if you stop putting yourself out there? We saw it on 2020, right? It was just a big shut off, right? People just stopped socializing like they used to, which is why now we're in this opposite. Now we're on this. Now we're in this. Now we're on this. What do you call it? Situation where we're fighting back against it, right? And that's an intentional decision that we all make, right? And so by doing that, we actually get those reps in. We start to cultivate it and we start to build upon that, right? Which gives opportunity for everybody to get back in the game, so to speak, right, socially. So one thing I wanted to talk about is, while it's great, talking about run clubs for a second, while it's and group fitness events, it's amazing, it's great, right? While that's getting people involved and while that's getting people connected, there's one thing I want to talk about in regards to fitness, which is the surface, right? I think when you start out in fitness, a great motivator is the surface level stuff, right? The looks, right? You want to look attractive. You want to, you want to be attractive to the person, to the opposite sex. You want to glow up after a breakup, right? You want to glow up so hard that whatever partner you were with before thinks, damn, I missed out, or I fumbled a bag, right? All those little things, etc. And that's completely fine. We all want to level up, right? We do what we do. Sometimes petty motivation and petty fuel is always a great start, as long as you don't stay there, right? And this is why it can get dangerous if you don't anchor it to a bigger purpose and a bigger mission that's beyond the initial fuel and the initial spark, right? And this is why it can start to feel empty over time, because a lot of people, I think, optimize, particularly in the fitness industry, in the fitness transformation or the fitness arc, around the surface, right? And this is where, at the start, right, to go from 0 to 1, it's huge, right? It's night and day, right? You go through this whole hero's journey, right? You claim your confidence back, you choose yourself again, you love yourself again. But then there reaches a point in the journey where there is a point of diminishing returns, right? And that's where it starts to feel empty. And if you don't anchor it to something bigger than just the surface there, right? If that makes sense. This is where we can start talking about identity. And identity, it's not quite a linear sort of like way to look at what that progression looks like, right? Just because it's not always obvious in the moment and in whatever current season of life, how that manifests and how that plays out. But you'd hit a roadblock when you start losing, when you start to feel something off, when things start to feel flat, or when progress, what used to feel exciting, stops feeling exciting, right? That's when, if you stopped long enough and you pause long enough, you can realize, okay, hang on, my soul is trying to tell me something. And that signal, right? That signal that something needs to be done a bit differently. And this is where things can stay surface and stay hollow and stay empty, because what most people do, they double down. They double down on more of the same, right? Maybe harder, they grind harder, etc., etc. When a lot of times the answer is counterintuitive, okay? And it starts when you can pause long enough to allow what comes up to land, so you can unearth the answers that was already there. And that's where we can really start to go underneath that. Beyond the surface of fitness, and beyond the surface, and how to get to the next layer of identity, okay? I think the world yearns for a lot of, I think society, the world at large, social media, all of us, we yearn for depth, we yearn for soul, but yet we feel ill-equipped or under-equipped or inadequately equipped to find it, to connect it and to hold it, okay? But underneath that is a story. Everyone has a story, okay? Storytelling is the medium in which you can really stand out here. And I'm not talking just from let's forget it. So we'll talk about branding and business after, but let's talk about first your identity. How do you be memorable, right? How do you live a life that's unforgettable? Okay, it's your story. Okay, it's your story. It's the presence and the confidence and the surface, right? All those things they get anchored in who you are and where you've been and who you are now and where you are going, right? What you don't use, you lose. And what I mean by that is, like, if you stop anchoring yourself to yourself, then you drift, right? Hope I'm making some sense here. And so in business, the cost of losing this is even higher. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about content for a second. Okay, so let's talk about last week on episode 2. We talked a little bit about AI, right? And we talked about its and people's fears of AI in the creator economy, but not just AI in the creator economy, AIs across the space collectively. Right? I want to emphasize the point that when we can spend the time exercising our humanness, right, and not relying too much on, because another danger as well, and it was an article just a few days ago in regards to people. The danger is when you start sourcing your point of origin and your thought process and your decision-making faculties to something that's not sentient as an AI. That's when it gets very, very, very dangerous, right? And so that's another thing as well, just to always cultivate your consciousness, right, and your sentience and what makes you you. Okay, that's the part that it cannot fake, it cannot replicate. Okay, and that's what makes you sticky, because this ties back to, how does a human imprint another human, right? How does a human leave a person better than they found him? And how does another person be memorable, right? It's your humanness. It's the raw, the messiness, the authenticity, right? Which ties into a trend which we're seeing in marketing and in the overall landscape that we're seeing, right? In across retail, across products, across e-commerce. There's a rise in nano-influencers, micro-influencers, regular people creating content that's authentic, that's relatable, that's connecting, but also at the same time aspirational to the customers, right? To the person that the product's selling to, right? Because 5 to 10 years ago, you'd have there is a monopoly on influencers. So you have these big famous influencers who cost a lot of money for you to advertise, right? And it's usually get up with polished, professional, commercial advertisements and so on, right? But what we're seeing now, the reason for the rise in nano influencers and the reason for the rise in micro influencers has to do with authenticity, right? And just realness. Okay, so it ties back to that marketing principle where you can, as a company, as a brand, you can talk as great as you want about the product, but that does not compare to someone else talking about how great your product is, right? But let me break that down for a second. It used to be, okay, so if you bring on an influencer, someone that is known, the influencer is you are leveraging the influencer's inbuilt trust and goodwill and reputation, right, and status over their followers and their audience and so forth. right? But we're going a step further than this now, okay? So when we're looking at, say, user-generated content and we're talking about nano-influencers and micro-influencers, we are now talking about we're talking about a group, a collective, a community of people who are relatable, right? Of creating authentic content that's real, that's relatable, that connects to the customers, right? But also at the same time, a little bit aspirational, okay? And that's where it leads back down to the authenticity aspect, okay? So yes, while if I tie this back to the fear of AI influencers, AI creators replacing creators, that can happen if you as a creator, as a human creator, puts in very, very little effort, or you're doing the bare minimum, or you're just basically churning out scripts and briefs that have been produced by ChatGPT, because anybody can do that now, right? Without infusing that soul element, that element that imprints, right? Because if there's one thing you got to always ask yourself is, how do you make yourself indispensable and irreplaceable? It's asking yourself, what is something that you can do as a human that cannot be replaced by AI? And as it stands at the moment, AI cannot build communities. They cannot build stickiness. They cannot imprint on you and me, okay? The way I or you might someone, right, in each other's lives or in someone else's lives, right? We've all had people in our lives who, through our uniqueness, right, stand out and stick, right? That's the special superpower and gift that we can learn and always remember to cultivate, right? So it just sums back down to remembering who the fuck you are makes you indispensable, right, in this day and age. And I hope that makes complete sense, right? These are some of the things that's come up as it ties back to what you don't use, you lose. And so fundamentally, it started with the body. It started with training, but then we went back down to the branding and so forth, right? Because yes, while technology and artificial intelligence will replace a lot of things which can be replaced, things which can be efficient, right? It cannot replace the things that don't scale, right? The things that, in its beautiful inefficiency, is what makes it beautiful, is what creates magic, okay? And that's where it is, right? So let's wrap this up now. Hope this has given you some thoughts here. Let me see what I said. Okay, let me see. I've covered nano-influencers, and I covered confidence, I covered presence, I covered socializing, etc., etc. I'm glad you, if you're listening to this early on in the journey, you're sort of seeing this, in real time as we're smoothing this, right? I don't care how it looks. I'm just gonna keep it rolling. Yeah. So I'll wrap it up with this, right? It always ties back to the basics, which is a slide edge, right? Every single day we have a decision to make and a choice to make, right? The things which are easy to do, but are also easy not to do, right? So things which you don't use, you lose, and you won't notice it there and then. You won't see it reflected back within a week, within a month, right? But within 3 months, 6 months, a year, like, holy shit, right? You'll see the gap, right? And this is where every single day, taking the actions, making the habits a part of your identity, you're like reinforcing that, you will see it compound, right? Because the opposite is also true, right? What you use, what you continue to use, right, takes on momentum, takes on a life of its own, and it becomes the things that build things upon things, right? And that's the beauty of it. I think human, also in the age of technology, we want things now, right? We're not used to delaying gratification, which is why it becomes quite tricky. And this is why it becomes important to be more intentional about this. But I'll leave you with this here to you guys. What's one small thing, right, you could do today to avoid losing what matters? That is, if you know there are things which you've been putting off, right? You've been putting off for a while. Identify those things, right? It could be one or two things. And then make a decision to step back on the horse, right? Put one foot in front of the other, and let's go, right? And if you are, for instance, in momentum, if you are, for instance, listening to this and you got a few things going at the moment, it's firing, this is a great reminder to keep going, right? Because that momentum is gold and that momentum is fuel, all right? So I hope all of this landed. Thank you for listening. Share this with someone if you think they'll find it valuable, right? Don't forget to follow and comment, right? Really, really appreciate you guys listening this far, and I'll see you for episode 4.